Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Raw Men podcast. I think this is episode number 36 or thereabouts. And we are talking tonight with, for the holiday season, Dr. David Kyle Johnson, who's the author of The Myths, let me say this again, The Myths That Stole Christmas. Good evening, Dr. Kyle Johnson. How do you do, sir?
Thank you, Aaron. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
So when you get into the myths that stole Christmas, what's the opening thought there? Are we talking about the what? No, I'll let you continue. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, the basic idea is that when I mean myth, I don't mean like a mythical story like Star Wars or something like that. I mean a falsehood, a kind of false idea that is very prominent in society that many people believe. That's what I mean by myth. And when I say they stole Christmas, basically what I mean is that these misconceptions that we have about the season and its history and its effects and that kind of stuff has negatively affected the way that people experience the holiday, the way they celebrate the holiday, even the way they don't celebrate the holiday if they choose not to. And so the idea basically is that if you do celebrate, whether you're religious or not, that debunking these myths and having a better understanding of the holiday can actually help you enjoy it more. And as I phrase it in my subtitle, we can kind of take the holiday back. It kind of takes us. It kind of has controls it up, and we kind of do what we say when it says. And if you understand it better, you can make Christmas work for you instead of us working for Christmas.
Okay, so when I deal with a lot of mythicists on this show, and so we my first thought, of course, is how Christmas is based on Saturnalia or something like this, and how all of these other integrated myths have been put together to kind of manufacture the holiday. But you're not talking about the Yule and Saturnalia and all of these other traditions being blended together. You're talking about something else. You're talking about something more modern. Am I taking that right?
Yeah, I mean, by the word Christmas, I mean something more modern. But the first myth number one, which is chapter number 1, is that Jesus is the reason for the season. So by going into that and seeing why that's not the case, seeing why probably most of your listeners already know that Christmas is based on so it's based on the old pagan traditions of Saturnalia and Yule. It actually goes even further back than that. I trace it back about 6,000 years to old King for a Day festivals, celebrating like Seika and Zagmuk, these old Babylonian traditions, and we find some origins in some of our traditions even that far back.
You might have to jump in, and because I've got to ask you about those.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I knew quite a bit about this, and yet you just mentioned 2 or 3 names that I've never heard of.
So, okay. Yeah. So I don't have the book in front of me, so let's see if I can make sure to get the names right. The Babylonians did Zagmuk, I believe. And I may be messing up my names here. There was a Babylonian celebration. There was one celebration called Zagmuk, and there was another one called Seika. And they both had a basic kind of idea. So the basic idea behind them was very, very similar. The idea was that since the days were getting shorter, they did not know whether they would just continue to get shorter or whether they would ever get longer again. They thought that basically the forces of chaos were breeding war and trying to take away the sunlight. And so their idea was basically that their god, Marduk, had to fight off the forces of chaos, and he needed help. And in order to get that help, someone needed to descend into the underworld to help him out. And the king was basically the one that was sort of expected to do this. But of course, the only way that you can descend into the underworld is to die. Kings did not very much like dying, and so what they would do is appoint a peasant or a servant as king for a day. And that peasant or servant would basically get every whim they wanted granted, whether it be food or sex or whatever they wanted. And then at the end of the day, they would be killed, and that supposedly was when they would descend into the underworld to help fight out the forces of chaos. And then when they were apparently successful, people would burn images of the defeated gods and celebrate that the spring was going to return. But what's important about that is that social inversion, when you make someone who's lowly king for a day and you kind of put the lowly on top, that tradition finds its way all the way into Saturnalia in the Roman world, where in Saturnalia the people who were rich had to serve the poor. people who did not have food, they would have to serve them at the same table and give them their best food and drink. And then that actually, if you follow the history through it, that eventually turns into sailing rituals, that eventually turns into even the kind of charity traditions that we have still today. At Christmas time is supposed to be a time to give more to the needy. And so those traditions trace back all the way back to those old Marduk, Sayaka traditions.
Fascinating. As I said, I thought I knew about this, but these are completely unknown to me. So I'm probably going to be watching this video after this interview is over with, and then looking these things up and reading the stories for myself.
Great book for that, for the stuff that I was just talking about, is Earl Count's book. I think it's called 4,000 Years of Christmas History, but his name is Earl Count. Look up his book, and he talks about all those old traditions in there. It's a little book too. It's not very thick. It's real easy to get through. It's very fascinating.
Okay, well, very good. So when you talk about the myths that you were talking about, though, were not the myths that Christianity, or excuse me, that the Christmas was founded on, right? You're talking about some other traditions that we've since embellished into it.
Right, yeah. So when you talk about mythicists, I'm not talking about like David Fitzgerald's like Jesus was a myth. I'm not talking about that. I'm just kind of, in the book, I'm neutral on that position. That wasn't way pro or con on the argument I'm making. Basically, the 7 myths actually that I'm talking about, that I say have hijacked the holiday, are that Jesus is the reason for the season, that there is a war on Christmas. I suggest that there is actually no such thing, meaning the war on Christmas.
Well, then you're probably going to be irritated at the way that I promoted this evening's conversation.
Well, we can talk more about that. So the third myth is that our traditions are old-fashioned. Most of them are not. The fourth myth is that Christmas spending is good for the economy. I argue that it is not good for the economy. The fifth myth is that Santa is St. Nicholas. That's kind of a common idea, that that's what Santa is. And the sixth myth is that the Santa Claus lie is harmless, that lying to your children about Santa Claus is harmless. I argue that it's not. And then the seventh myth is simply that Christmas can't change. I argue that.
All right, I want to talk about each one of these if this goes in line with what you wanted to do. I want to talk about each one of these in turn. I'm not a huge on economics, so I don't care about talking about whether the Christmas spending benefits the economy or not. That would go over my head regardless. The idea that Santa Claus is St. Nicholas. Mm-hmm. This one I understood. This is one everybody seems to accept it. That Santa Claus seems to be a blend of St. Nicholas from the Nicene Convention and some interpretation of Odin from Norse mythology. You're saying that's not the case?
There's some Odin in there. There might even be some St. Nicholas in there as well. But the primary contributor to Santa Claus, what he looks like and what he does, finds its place somewhere else. And in fact, I argue in the book that the story is much more complicated, that both Odin and St. Nicholas find their origin in an even more ancient god that Phyllis Schiefer calls the Wild Man. I actually argue in the book that St. Nicholas never existed. I'm a mythicist about St. Nicholas.
Wait. You're a mythicist about St. Nicholas?
Yes.
Who was a participant in the Nicene Convention?
Well, that's not established, that he was a participant in the Nicene Convention.
The story that I heard was Athenus and Irenaeus. I can't remember. Irenaeus is at least one of the names. I'm sure I'm forgetting the other one.
Yeah.
There was a schism in the Nicene Convention when certain people wanted to obviously take care of some contradictions in the Old Testament versus the New Testament. Things like where in Isaiah 45, where God says, that there is only me and there are no other gods. And of course the first commandment says that thou shalt not worship any other gods before me. And then Jesus comes along and says that I am the way and the light and no one will get to the Father but by me. Well, these are definite contradictions. And the only way to reconcile these contradictions is to have Jesus and God be the same person, although the New Testament never says anything about the Trinity at all. Jesus always, only, ever refers to God as someone else, somewhere else, who can do things he can't do and knows things he doesn't know. So you had these people trying to take care of these contradictions, and so they're going to create the Trinity. And the schism was, and I think it was Irenaeus that was the one that was going against. But no, never mind.
It's Arius.
Arius. Thank you. So they have this argument, and then the story is that St. Nicholas had this particularly brutal debate skill where he walked up to Arius and punched him in the face.
Right, right. That's
And
the
so,
story.
this was Saint Nicholas punching him in the face over a religious argument. Merry Christmas, have a knuckle sandwich.
Right. Yes. And if you watch Kirk Cameron's movie from last year, his Christmas movie called Saving Christmas, he
You
has his
couldn't
own
pay
kind
me
of.
to do that.
I actually did. I actually did watch it last year in preparation for the book, and I wrote a couple of articles on it. And it was awful. But and you can look up my Psychology Today blog, and I wrote a blog for The Humanist. You can find my take on it there in detail. But one of he actually depicts this confrontation between Arius and Saint Nicholas, and it's brutal. The way he has it, like drags him outside and is like beating him. I mean, just pummeling him. So yes, that is the story. The problem is
I'm really embarrassed that I just cited the same thing that Kirk Cameron had cited at some point.
Well, you should be. You should be. So this is the story. The problem is that there is no reason to think this story is historically accurate. In fact, the first time that it pops up, I have the exact date in the book. My memory's recalling, it's only in the past 400 or 500 years. It's not. Which of course the Nicene Council would have been about 1500 years ago. And it seems that the story was actually invented to explain an anomaly. So everyone holds that Nicholas was at the Nicene Convention, but we have copies of the roll of bishops that were kept at the council, and Nicholas is not on most of them. I think there are 9 copies that exist, and he's only on 3 of them. And so,
well, where do you get all this background story about all of the? 2 different background stories, granted. One where he's making donations to orphanages or some such thing, and the other one where he's actually just giving money to hookers.
Right. So let me get to that. So it seems that the reason that the story that you just referred to about Arius seems to have been invented as a way to explain his absence from the role. The idea is because he punched Arius, they defrocked him, because you can't do that kind of thing in front of an emperor, and it was an official role of bishops, so he was no longer a bishop, so they erased his name. But if they erase his name on some, why would they erase his name on others? The more likely explanation, I go into this a little bit more detail in the book, but the more likely explanation is that he was never on the roll in the first place, and it was medieval monks later on copying down those rolls after St. Nicholas lore became popular, basically looking at the rolls, doing the math, and realizing, oh, St. Nicholas should have been there, and we'll go ahead and add him on. And as you probably know, that was very common for monks to do in the Middle Ages, is to add passages into scripture or books or rolls or whatever that they thought needed to be there, right?
Yeah, I've seen that.
That seems to be the better explanation for why he's missing from those rolls.
So let me ask you.
Well, let me speak to those stories that you mentioned, like the giving money to the prostitutes, right? This is the 3 daughters story where he slipped bags of gold into this widower's house in order to give him dowries to marry off his daughters, right? And he does one night, he uses the money correctly, so he does it a second night and a third night, and he's caught the third night, and he says never to tell anybody because it's supposed to be a secret, and clearly he didn't because we know about the story, right? The problem is that most likely did not actually happen to the historical St. Nicholas, because that story is found verbatim in the stories of Apollonius, a Greek Pythagorean philosopher. That same story, and that predates Nicholas by quite a ways.
So Apollonius, is this Apollonius of Tyana?
Yes, I believe that is the right Apollonius.
Okay, so what you're telling me, and I love this. This is so juicy. I just want to savor the flavor of this for a moment. What you're telling me is that the myths of Jesus and Santa Claus both stem from the same guy.
yeah. Some of them do. Yeah, some of them do. Right. So I mean, and really, when we start looking at the Nicholas lore and the Nicholas stories that we see, all of them are myths. Every story that is attributed to Saint Nicholas can be found in some other pagan, usually deity figure that came before him. So Apollonius not only has the 3 daughters, but I think he has the perpetual virginity, and he has the chastity, and then he has like the giving to the poor and that kind of stuff. The seafaring miracles. Nicholas is a patron saint of seafarers, and so he appears on ships and walks on water, and those are all Poseidon's miracles. In fact, in the book, I cite a Catholic Church and the Catholic Church's encyclopedia that basically says that all we know about Nicholas is that he was a bishop from Myra in the 4th century. That's it. Everything else, including his attendance at Nicaea, is all considered to be non-established fact.
But what you're telling me is that the myth of Santa Claus is based on a myth of St. Nicholas.
Myth of St. Nicholas, that's right. So where does the myth begin, right? So if St. Nicholas, see, my argument basically is that St. Nicholas is like many other Catholic saints. And I'm not the one to establish this. The Jesuits actually went through the Catholic calendar and looked at all the saints that were on the calendar and did research to try to figure out which ones were historical and which ones not. And a lot of biggies, they did this I think in the 50s or 60s, a lot of biggies got cut from the list. St. Christopher, St. Valentine, St. Martin, I'm trying to think of another one, Demetrius, all got axed. They are not historical at all, right? They didn't do this with St. Nicholas.
You're not going to tell me that the guy in Ireland who fluted out all the snakes, you're not going to tell me he's not real either, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's not real. He's not real either, right? And so all I'm arguing is that this is just also true for St. Nicholas. So the question is, what God is he based on then? Well, like what saintly version of a god is he? Like with Saint Martin, that's just the Roman god Mars that was sainted, basically. They were trying to convert pagans. Pagans wouldn't stop praying to Mars, and so the church basically just declares that Mars is actually Saint Martin, so that when there are new Christians are praying to him, it's not really blasphemy. They're not praying to a pagan god. They're praying to a saint. So what my research seems to reveal is that what Nicholas is most likely based on, he is a saintly version of the Wild Man. The Wild Man, there's this great book, so if you want to look this stuff up, there's a great book by Phyllis Schiefer called Santa Claus Laughs at the Wild Men. First 2 or 3 chapters are dynamite. And what she seems to indicate is that in Northern Europe, German areas, what we now call Germany and Teutonic areas, especially in the mountains and that kind of stuff, there were traditions about to bring back the spring. And they may have even, this actually may have been, because these traditions are even older than the Zagmuck traditions that I was speaking of before. The idea was they wanted to bring back the spring, again, because they were concerned that winter would never end. And so they had this belief in a god that was kind of a nature god. He was kind of half man, half beast, and he was tied to the land in a certain kind of way so that his health reflected the land. This may have even eventually influenced King Arthur tradition. There's a tradition in King Arthur that the king's health is tied to the land. If the king is sick, the land is sick. If the king is well,
you're not going to tell me that King Arthur is a myth too, are you?
Well, you know what? Funny that you mentioned that. I'm also a professor for the great courses, and I just listened to one of my fellow professors, and there is a wonderful course at the great courses on King Arthur, and she argues that there might be a little historical nugget for King Arthur. Of course, most of it's legend, but she actually argues in a pretty good case that there may have actually been a person and even a Camelot per se for King Arthur. But that aside, this idea was that the health of this creature was tied to the land. So what they would do is they would have a priest dressed up as this half beast, half man. He would put on furs. He would likely put on goat horns. Usually it was half goat, half man. But they put on goat horns and furs, and they would lure him out. And then they would lure him out usually with a maiden, and they would chain him up. And he was a fertility god because he represented that rebirth and relife, and so he would usually carry some kind of phallus or a pitchfork or sometimes even like a whole tree, but like a small tree or something like that.
Let me just backtrack. He would carry a phallus.
Yeah, like so a phallic symbol. I mean, like sometimes literally it would be a phallus. Like it would just be like he would just be carrying a penis or something that represented a penis, right? So I doubt it was. Yeah. I doubt it was as accurate as ones that you can find, on eBay. They don't sell dildos on eBay. I have no idea. So wherever
if they don't sell, I'll have to look it up now. If they don't sell dildos on eBay, I'd be surprised.
yeah, that's true because they probably do. They probably sell everything on eBay. So anyway, it probably wasn't as accurate as that, right? But they're carrying around some kind of fertility symbol. And they would actually threaten people with it and shake it in their face and stuff. And sometimes they would threaten
with a dildo.
No, I have not.
Yeah, there was there's a parallel with the Santa Claus in I think it's Chinese tradition, which there's one version of Buddha, and this is one of the reasons that Americans always think that Buddha is fat. The fat Buddha is not actually Buddha. If you look at yeah, actual Buddhist renditions. Buddha as a man of normal, healthy proportions. They just always put him in statues that are 600 feet high, as if he has to do combat with Godzilla. But the version that we get of the fat Buddha is actually a different character. It's from Chinese tradition called Hotei. Are you familiar with Hotei?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
Hotei he's a wild man. He's a nomad who wanders around with a bag of we can always, I forget what the enchantment is, but it's an enchanted bag where you can always reach in and then pull something out.
Oh, cool.
Okay, and it's a bag full of toys or treats or whatever that he gives to kids. And this is in the Chinese or the Buddhist tradition, and I'm like, this is Santa Claus. It's a Santa Claus who's a nomad who's wandering around, giving sweets to kids, and maybe in the modern day he'd be driving around in a van. I don't know.
Right.
But the legend seems to be a parallel of Santa Claus, and I don't see how they could possibly be literally linked. Mm-hmm. But they do have this strong parallel. I mean, he's got this bag that, how many Santa Claus could not fit toys for every kid in the world in the sack that he has on the back of his sleigh, right? But this is what Hotei has. He has the bag that could do that.
Right. Do you know how old this tradition is?
I don't have a date for it.
Okay, that would be interesting because it's very similar. I mean, I can tell you where Santa's bag comes from, and in a wonderful book called Krampus that I'll probably talk a bit about later, about an artist named Brahm. He actually has Santa, and he has kind of an explanation for how the bottomless bag works. Basically, the bag is a dimensional portal that opens up into another room that basically has a storehouse of all of Santa's goodies and toys and that kind of stuff. So you can, if you dive into the bag, you can land into Santa's workshop.
Can you explain this then? Why is it that whenever you get toys that are made by Santa's elves, they always have American brand names, or like Tonka or Mattel? And kids don't seem to question this. It always confused me.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things that they don't question it, and that's kind of disappointing because we encourage them not to question it. That's a whole other debate we might talk about here in a little bit. But let me get back around to where St. Nicholas comes from. The end of this tradition with the wild man is they would lead him to the middle of town, and then he would copulate with the woman, either really or pretend, and then they would kill him, either really, usually pretend.
Let me run back over that again.
Okay.
We have a Santa Claus figure who has to pretend to copulate with women before they kill him.
Yeah, he's not Santa Claus yet. He's a beast man at this point.
And he pretends to copulate, and then they kill him.
Yeah, so there's different versions. It would depend on what village you were in, basically, right? So there would be versions where he would actually copulate, and then he would really be killed. And then what you're supposed to do is he's supposed to resurrect. Now, if he's really dead, you can't do that, so his resurrection is the child that's now inside the woman, right? But in probably what was more common, the pretend versions, he would pretend to copulate, then someone would pretend to kill him, and then a doctor would come out and pretend to revive him. And that revival was supposed to be, now he's better. That resurrection signaled his health returning, and that would mean the land would return to health, and that's what brought back the spring. And so they would do this ritual over and over again each year to bring back the spring. Well, this ritual is very popular in the German areas, and continues to be popular even as Christianity rolls into those areas, into the Teutonic and German areas. And so, as the church was apt to do, it's basically trying to do 2 or 3 things, really, to try to keep people from worshiping the wild man. Pope Gregory, I believe it's Pope Gregory, actually just said, stop doing that, that's the devil. I call this the water boy technique. If you don't like something, you just call it the devil. That's what the water boy, the movie The Water Boy with... what's his name?
We don't discuss Adam Sandler movies.
Yeah, right, Adam Sandler, right. But his mother, his mother doesn't want to play football, so she says, foosball's the devil. That's what they did. They said, the wild man's the devil, stop doing that. Right?
Do you see a parallel between the wild man that you're talking about and Enkidu?
And what again?
Enkidu.
I do not know who Enkidu is.
Gilgamesh's boyfriend?
Oh, there might be. If there's more than likely, if there's horns and fur involved, more than likely there is. Because what happens?
So when you're talking about the horns, is that a segue into Krampus?
Yes, it is. So what happens here? There's kind of 2 things that happen here. One is when he calls him the devil. This is when the devil gets his signature look: the goat hooves and the pitchfork and the horns. he looks like now the wild man. Before, if the devil was ever described or depicted, he'd be a snake, or he'd be a flash of light, or he'd be literally a fallen angel. And then whenever
What
I
time
think I
period are
think
we talking about now?
we're talking, if I'm not mistaken, my memory serving, we're talking about 800s, I think, as Germany is being Christianized.
Okay.
Um,
Because I was going to say
and
there's a Renaissance painting or a Renaissance era painting that I saw that depicts the devil as a very strange kind of a peanut body that has a mouth for an anus, and the mouth
hmm,
and it's a very warped presentation, but it's not anything we would currently recognize as the traditional icon of what Satan's supposed to be.
right, yeah, and I wouldn't claim that this would be the only depiction of him, but this is when that kind of what we would consider the traditional depiction of the devil became popular. In fact, he even started to appear in village plays that the church would put on, and the devil was actually comic relief, but he would appear as the wild man, this kind of goat-legged horned creature. But the
Now
other thing that they
this has no relation to Pan. Then this is just
No, it
coincidental.
does. No, it
Okay.
does. It does. So if you read Skeefer actually, and she maybe exaggerates how many different things it influenced, but I think that she's definitely right that it influenced Pan. That in fact Pan, the Greek god, was originally the head of the pantheon. That's why panoramic means all-encompassing. Pan was the all, and all the other gods were subservient to him. As time went on, he kind of got demoted, and Zeus and Apollo and others went on to the top. But originally Pan was the main god on top, and that's where he comes from, is from that old wild man tradition, and that's why he has the goat legs and the horns. Um, and so, but what the other thing that they did was they deposed him and made him the sidekick of a saint. They made him a sidekick of Saint Nicholas. But what I actually argue is all that Saint Nicholas is, and this is in fact where Saint Nicholas lore starts to appear. And I'm sorry, we're not talking. We're talking 500s, not 800s. I'm messing up my dates. I'm so sorry. I don't have my book in front of me. Um, but when Nicholas starts to first appear, especially when he's appearing in people's homes, he already has the wild man in tow as a companion. And the name for the wild man, one of the most common names for the wild man, was Klaus. Now, Klaus in German is what your nickname would be if your full name was Nicholas. In America, if your name is Nicholas, your nickname is Nick, but in Germany, you go by the last half of your nickname, Klaus. And so if you were to saint the wild man, if you were to turn that old wild man god into a saint, and then call him by his full name, as you should do because now he's a saint, he would be Saint Niklaus. And in fact, what the Dutch still call Saint Nicholas, Sinterklaas, really just means Saint Klaus. And so my argument is that's actually where St. Nicholas comes from, just like so many other Catholic gods, or so many Catholic saints, excuse me, it's like so many other Catholic saints, he is just a sainted version of a pagan deity, in this case.
Let me ask a clarifying question then.
Sure.
When you talk about the mythicism of St. Nicholas, I accept that, everything that you're saying here, it sounds probable. But the schism between Arius and, what was it, Athanasius over the Trinity, that happened, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, Arius was a real person, and
Okay.
he had disagreements at the council with Trinity and specifically the divinity of Christ, that kind of stuff. That happened. The part that didn't happen, I argue, is Nicholas decking him.
The reason I bring that up is because my professor of the history of world religions had a hypothesis that I really appreciated, where it talked about how he was banished. Arius was banished to Medina, of all places, and that this was indirectly related to the rise of Islam, and the perspective that Muslims have with regard to Jesus being the way that Arius presented him. Well, if Arius was in his group, his little minority there, were banished to Medina, that would make perfect sense. And it just seemed to be a working hypothesis, and I thought you were just about to pull the leg from under that.
Yeah, no. Arius and his heresy, that definitely happened. The part I'm arguing is just Nicholas didn't punch him in the face because Nicholas didn't exist. He wasn't there because he didn't exist.
Because there is no damn Santa Claus, Virginia. Not
right,
even then.
But so you mentioned Krampus, right? So this does eventually lead to Krampus. The wild man becomes a companion. I think he gets sainted into Saint Nicholas, but also at the same time becomes a companion of Saint Nicholas. And so when people start visiting people in Saint Nicholas's name, and then so very quickly, you also mentioned Odin. this is likely why Odin has horns, is because he was influenced by the wild man tradition as well. And Odin has certain big bearded, he rides a flying livestock properties that, and I'm not sure how those arrived in Odin, but those eventually got transferred over to St. Nicholas. And so Nicholas has got the big white beard and the flying horse, and that's how you see, Nicholas in Europe still today.
I wonder if there's a link with the fact that Odin's horse has 8 legs.
Yes, I wonder that as well. We know where the 8 reindeer come from. They were invented by Clement Clarke Moore's poem "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," or what was originally called "A Visit from St. Nicholas." That's the first time he has 8, but it's entirely possible that he got that number by borrowing from that old tradition.
And then, of course, he doesn't really have 8; he has 9.
Right, yeah, and that gets invented by Montgomery Ward in the 1950s, Rudolph.
And so you're talking about a company now, a financial company that invented Montgomery Ward invented Rudolph, effectively. Well, we also have where Santa Claus himself was invented by Coca-Cola.
Yeah, so that is not quite accurate.
Okay.
That is a common.
Again, I thought I knew stuff.
Right. There's a good Snopes article on this as well. So what happens with Santa Claus? See if I can finish the story quickly for how we get to Santa Claus. St. Nicholas gets some of Odin's attributes: the flying horse, the big white beard, etc. But he has this visitor with him who's basically the wild man. The wild man is the dispenser of punishments. He's still in chains, but he's led by Nicholas, and if you've been bad, Nicholas might let go of the chains, and that punisher could wreak havoc on you. This tradition becomes different things in different places. The Germans call him Kench Rupert. Other places call him Hans Trop. In the Netherlands, he's called Black Peter. He's nice. He's not as demonic. Black Peter's not as demonic, although he's a bit racist. And then in Austria, he's Krampus, and Krampus is this very demonic, long-horned, red-tongued, goat-legged figure.
My wife thinks that image is totally hot, by the way.
It's pretty awesome. It really is awesome. And if you look at the novel I mentioned before, Brahms' novel Krampus, he's an artist as well, but he's written this novel, but it comes with this amazing artwork. He was nice enough to let me put his version of his Krampus in my book, and it's beautiful. I love it. And so what happens is when the Protestants reject St. Nicholas because he's a Catholic saint, they don't reject the tradition entirely, and so they end up combining the two figures into one. Like the Pennsylvania Germans combine them into a figure called Pelznickel or Belsnickel. That means furry Nicholas. So he's got the fur like Krampus, but he's more human-like, like Nicholas, and he's this new figure. And then that gets adopted in certain ways by Clement Clarke Moore. With Clement Clarke Moore, he's got the fur from head to foot, very much like Krampus did or Belsnickel did. But he's dirty and sooty, and he's an elf. He's tiny with a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. That's why he can slip in your chimney. He doesn't use Christmas magic. He just fits because he's a tiny little elf and can fit down your chimney.
So how small is that Santa Claus supposed to be?
Well, if you look on the cover of the book by Stephen Nissenbaum called The Battle for Christmas, the picture on that cover is the first illustrated version, like the first illustration that came with "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," and you'll see that he's a little 2-foot little impish guy that's wearing furs, and he's got a little pipe, and he's that's what he originally was
almost
depicted
leprechaun.
as. Right. Yeah, really, he does kind of look like a leprechaun. He really does. What happens to make him full grown is that Thomas Nast depicts him as a full-grown, rotund person in 1881. There's a couple illustrations that come before that, but that's the main one that happens in 1881. And so that's when he becomes full-grown, and people start, even when they illustrate The Night Before Christmas, they depict him as full-grown, even though it specifically says that he's an elf. That full-grown figure starts to appear in different ways in different times, and he appears in different colors. Sometimes he's wearing green, sometimes he's wearing brown, it's blue, it's red, yada, yada, yada. What Coca-Cola does is, he had appeared in red and white before, but he had appeared in other colors. The red and white may have been getting more popular by the time that Coca-Cola comes along. But what Coca-Cola does is solidifies the image of Santa Claus as that red and white figure. If you saw Santa Claus in any other color now, it doesn't really look like Santa. Coca-Cola solidified the red and white because it matched their logo. And that ad campaign by Sunbloom in 1931 was so popular that now basically if your Santa Claus doesn't look exactly like a Coca-Cola ad, it doesn't really look like Santa. That's what Coca-Cola did. They didn't invent Santa Claus by any stretch, but they can at least lay claim to popularizing the red and white Santa Claus.
I've seen a few versions of Santa Claus that are more in line with my depiction of Santa. My depiction of Santa always had his beard braided in two directions and always looks more Viking than
You would love Krampus's book. He has in the book Krampus and Saint Nicholas basically war it out for control of Christmas, and his Santa Claus, if I remember correctly, has got the braids in his beards, and he's really bulky, and you would love Brahms' book. It's good stuff.
Well, very good. Now you mentioned also about your six different topics that you were going to talk? Seven. Okay, one of them being whether it was damaging to have children taught the myth of Santa Claus. I wholly agree with that. I would never tell this to my kids, and the issue that I have with this is, and this is a personal issue, I was 8 years old, holding on to something I knew to be impossible. Right? I knew that there was no justification for it at all. But my father told me that Santa Claus was real, and I honored my father to the point that I would not question him.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a frustrating thing for me because, I mean, I'm holding on to this belief that there could be the Santa Claus character. And I remember riding in the car, and I had a stepbrother at that time who was a year younger than me. He was criticizing me. He's 7 years old. I'm 8 years old. And he's criticizing me for still believing in Santa. And I said to him, I know it sounds ridiculous, but my daddy said that Santa Claus is real, and my daddy wouldn't lie to me, would you, Daddy?
Right.
And the next words my father said was, there's no Santa Claus, son.
Ouch. Ouch. That had to have been devastating. That had to have been devastating.
It was a pretty significant moment in my life, though fortunately not necessarily in my relationship with my father, but it was a significant moment in my life. And I can tell you honestly, that when I recovered from the initial shock, my first comment was, what about Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
And then my stepmother at that time said, oh, he's real. And I don't know why. They just, it somehow, oh, sure, oh, he's real. Why?
Right, yeah. How do I know that you're not lying to me about that as well, right? And even how do I know that you haven't been lied, by other people? Why you haven't been lied to by other people about that?
And
right?
one of the problems that my family had with me believing in Santa Claus at 8 years old was I'm thinking, okay, well, this guy can make anything he wants. Why would I? Remember we mentioned about how you always get toys from Santa and it's always marked with Mattel or Revell or whatever the name of the toy company is that made it.
Right.
Well, I asked for an ultralight aircraft because Santa can make whatever he wants. So surely he can make, his reindeer fly. So why can't
why not? Right.
I can fly in, make a tiny airplane that I can fly in at 8 years old, and that created. I think that was what prompted the argument for why we had to bring up whether the legitimacy of Santa Claus.
I've collected a number of stories from people about that kind of defining moment of their childhood when they found out the truth. And of course, for some people, it's completely mundane. They just find out and it's not a big deal. But others are very traumatic and they still remember them. A buddy of mine from grad school gave me his story, and it's in the book, where basically he did the same thing you did. He got in an argument with his entire class, actually. And his argument for why they were all wrong is my mother told me that he's real and my mother would never lie to me. And when his ignorance was exposed in front of the class, I actually looked it up in the encyclopedia. And when his ignorance was exposed in front of the whole class, it was humiliating. I mean, it was absolutely humiliating. He realized that his mother had lied to him, and that his trust for her was diminished, right? And that's one of the things. I actually have a multifaceted argument for why lying to children about Santa Claus, tricking them into believing that Santa is real, is just not a good idea. And one of the issues is trust. It doesn't happen for everyone, but it's risky. You risk your trustworthiness with your kids. Now, some skeptics, like I know that Rebecca Watson has argued this, some skeptics actually suggest this is a good thing because kids need to learn to be skeptical of authority. What better way to do that than to lie to them and then make them realize that authority figures, even their parents, can lie.
Well, I don't know what her personal experience was, but I wouldn't want to put another child through what I went through. Because
go ahead.
I understand. You want to know that you can question authority. And so when my kids asked me, at least when my daughter asked me when she was 7 years old, she asked me, "Daddy, which is the true religion?" And I remembered when I was a very young boy, I asked my mother what was the true religion, and she says, "Well, ours is, of course." And I thought, well, of course she would say that. Why would she say anything else? Right? That
Right.
was a stupid question to even ask that woman, because that's what she's going to say. So
Right.
the only thing I can do is come up with the reasons why everyone says that theirs is the true one. But my daughter asked me, which is the true religion, and I said, none of them. They're all wrong, including me.
Mm.
And she said, I don't like that answer. And I said, well, I'm sorry. That's the best answer you're going to get from anyone
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah, that's good. That's the most honest answer, right? That is the most honest answer. That was Socrates' answer, right? I don't know. That's usually the best answer to give, right? So yeah, and I argue that I mean we don't we do want our kids to be distrustful. We want to be skeptical of authority figures, but they really should be able to trust their parents. And the way to do that is to not lie to them about Santa Claus, but watch how other people lie to them about Santa Claus, and they'll realize that well, they can't trust other authority figures. They should be able to trust their parents, right? But this is only one worry I have about the Santa Claus lie. I By the way, I should mention I'm beginning to research this a little bit, but I'm suspecting that the issue of trust is probably more prominent, like the risk of trust losing your trustworthiness is probably more prominent if your child is on the autism spectrum because they have issues with trust and lying in general, and so that could be more damaging, or at least more risky. Um, but I also have problems with it. I mean, it's a lie, and I don't think it's a justified one. Um, you can create awe and wonder in your kids, and people might think that makes the lie worth it. But I could lie to my kids and trick them into thinking that Star Wars was real, but we wouldn't think that that was a justified lie.
I
Might be.
have a son. I have a son who is autistic and is prone to believe that. I remember once upon a time he thought that Uncle Sam was a real person.
Mhm.
Just to give you an example, we have to, and it's difficult to explain what is a joke, what is fiction, what is really real. How do you know if it's really real, and how do you know that that it's a story versus a lie?
Mhm.
These are difficult concepts. From somebody
Yep.
coming from that mindset. So
Yep, that's right in line with what my research, my little bit of research has shown is that it's especially, I mean, and the farther down the spectrum they are, the more risky it would be because there's just that problem of differentiating truth from fiction, and even there's studies that show they have problems with lying themselves. They can't keep track of their own lies and that kind of stuff, and it would be very risky.
And the other
And
problem
since
I have
it's
with it is the obvious one, which is the reason that people promote this idea of children believing in Santa Claus. And what one of the reasons that some people use is because they want to instill in their child faith. And
right.
I find that as an anti-theist and as an epistivist, and if you're not familiar with the term epistivist, it's a recent word for someone who rejects faith. And
Hmm.
ideally, or my definition of it is that it's someone who considers faith to be the most dishonest position it is possible to have. The
Right. It's
reason
not a
being,
virtue; it's a vice. Right.
exactly,
Right.
because it's something that it's not just believed, without reason, but it's also defended against all reason. It's something
Hmm.
that you assume, and then refuse to ever admit when you're wrong.
Hmm.
So, like every possibility on how this can be dishonest is occupied.
Right. Yeah. And so my worry about it is very similar as a philosopher and someone who teaches logic and critical thinking. I really have a problem with credulity, right? Of this kind of attitude that you shouldn't worry about evidence. You can believe something just because it's fun, right? And basically, one of my primary worries about the Santa Claus lie, I really, if honestly, if parents kind of just played the game and let the kids thought what they want to think, and then when they ask for the truth, they give them the truth or they lead them through a process of figuring out the truth. I have a little bit of problem with that, but I wouldn't object to that as
Are you
much as
familiar? Are you familiar with Dale McGowan?
no, I'm not.
Okay, he gives a presentation that's very much like that about how he weaned his kids out of Santa Claus, imposed, I think, by someone else, and he didn't contribute to it, but neither did he just put the knife through the whole thing. He waited for the kids to be ready to accept, and then he would like get them leading thinking ideas.
Yes, yes. And if you do that, and like you could even use it as a critical thinking exercise to get them to figure out the truth for themselves, I wouldn't disagree with that, because what I want is for parents, my ultimate kind of goal in this kind of overall objection to lying to kids about Santa is my goal is to get parents to appreciate and value teaching critical thinking to their kids. And what I think the worst example of, or one of the most obvious examples of where parents don't do that, is when their kids start to question and they don't want them to stop believing, and so they try to trick them into continue to believe. And so they will use bad evidence and tell them that it's good evidence. They will say it's just magic, encouraging them to believe it's actual magic, right? They will tell them, oh, just believe because it's fun, or believe because you won't get presents otherwise, teaching them that it's okay to believe something, not because of the evidence, but because it's fun. These are horrible critical thinking lessons that we are trying to instill in our kids. One of the best examples I really like to use is this. There's this video that you can find on Amazon called Search for Santa. It's this kind of made for Amazon only DVD that they just print out by the copy. But it is a mockumentary with actors playing scientists, and they go through and suggest that they have scientific evidence that Santa Claus exists. They found a sleigh runner in the desert. Well, how else could it get there unless it fell off Santa's sleigh? They have this really bad 8mm film that this little boy took whenever he was 9, and they call it the Swoboda Film, kind of like the Bigfoot film, and it supposedly has a frame in it that catches Santa Claus in the action. Of course, it's all bunk. It's all actors just pretending. None of them are actually serious. But the goal of this thing is that, it literally says it on the Amazon website, are your kids doubting that Santa exists? Show them this documentary and squeeze a couple more years of belief out of them. The problem is that this documentary is almost exactly like documentaries you see on the History Channel and the Discovery Channel today that trick you into believing that Megalodon is currently existing and real, that mermaids exist, that there's ancient aliens, that there's, you just list them off. It's the same tactics, it's the same kind of crappy reasoning, equating gut feeling with scientific evidence, and we do these kinds of things to keep our kids believing in Santa Claus, and we're instilling credulity in them.
I have to tell you, when I was a 12-year-old boy in 1974, there was a lot of documentaries like what you're talking about that was promoting all of these kind of absurdities, and people were giving me books by Zachariah Sitchin on the the Nazca lines and ancient aliens and all of this, and I was filled full of all this. Here's a good word, poppycock. I was filled with all of this nonsense from a very seemingly legitimate source.
Mm-hmm.
But the most irritating of all of them was a show called In Search Of, that was hosted by Leonard Nimoy.
Uh-huh.
And so, of course, everything that he says sounds logical, right?
Yes, it does. by fiat, right? It has to be logical. It's Spock.
So when I grew up believing that I had seen, or that I was aware, or that I had known about scientific evidence because I'd seen it presented on science documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me the longest time to realize what the source was, and to realize that it wasn't at all legitimate, and to realize that they knew that they were full of shit when they made it.
Yeah.
And how am I supposed to know when I'm being told, in the culture that I live in, tells me that skeptics are cynics, and that they're not getting the full picture, that only believers can accept, because they're critics.
Yeah.
What do they know? They're not. They're incapable of experiencing awe and wonder. This is the kind of bullshit that gets put on people who think, versus people who just blindly swallow whatever is told to them.
Yeah, for me it was Shroud of Turin documentaries. I grew up in the Bible Belt, and it'd be like on TBN or whatever that you would find these Shroud of Turin documentaries that were essentially the same kind of pseudoscientific nonsense, right? And the way I put it in the book, and I put it in other publications that I put out, is that what we do when we try to encourage the kids to believe in Santa Claus longer is we're trying to encourage that kind of credulity and naivete in them. We want that to last longer, because it's when it's over we consider their childhood over.
I have to tell you that there's at least one person that I know of that we can be sure the reason that this person believes in Jesus is the exact same reason that she held on to Santa Claus for so long as a child. It's that desire to believe in something mythical.
Mm-hmm.
We know that on some level that she's got to know that Jesus and Santa Claus are have a whole lot in common,
Yep.
but she just wants to cling to that for no apparent reason that I can understand because I don't understand her psychology.
Yeah, yeah, because it's fun, because it brings her comfort. Fun maybe is not the right word, because it brings her comfort, and because I mean, more than likely she was encouraged, as so many kids are, to if it's fun, if it's comforting, then it's okay to believe, and it is this kind of attitude that evidence doesn't matter, that faith is a virtue, that it's perfectly acceptable to believe something just because you want to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I
And
want
that's
to
all
do is,
very damaging to me. I mean,
yeah,
to my view.
I agree. And in the same way that I mean, a lot of people will complain at my view and say, well, we should be teaching them how to think. They're too young to learn how to think. We can't be teaching that. It's like, well, maybe that's true. I mean, certainly at a certain age they can't be, thinking that way. But you know what? I try to teach my kids how to speak long before they could talk. I was reading books to my little boy Johnny when he was 1 month old, right? And I wouldn't use poor speaking or poor grammar skills around him. I would encourage good grammar skills long before he could even talk. Same thing with walking. And if he started to walk early, I wouldn't shove him down on the ground and say, no walking yet. I don't want you to grow up that fast. If he started walking early, I'd celebrate it as a monumental accomplishment. The same thing should be true whenever they break through that naivete and realize that Santa Claus isn't real. It is not something that credulity and naivete that they've lost at that moment is not something we should prolong. It's something that we should celebrate. We should celebrate the fact that they've gotten rid of that credulity and encourage them to do it and not try to prolong it.
One of the flaws that I see in a lot of parenting is that people see their children as either continuations of themselves, or they see their children as somehow subservient to themselves. And of course, that's the worst one.
Yeah.
Seeing your child as a continuation of yourself is like it's at least forgivable. But I've seen cases where the subservient perspective is actually held, where you're raising the kids to take care of you when you're older, that sort of thing, and it just. Your kids are supposed to have an advantage over you, and it's not one that you're supposed to give them a reward. It's not a financial advantage. They're supposed to have an advantage in terms of a skill set, and that absolutely has to include, a cognitive skill set. That they have to be able to think faster than you and work things out better than you can. Because how are you going to trust your aging years to somebody who's incompetent? They have to know better than you did.
Yeah, you want them to. You should want them to, right? Yeah.
So what was another
completely agreement there.
Thank you. Another of your 7 points.
The War on Christmas. You did say something about maybe you didn't like the way I promoted. I may not like the way you promoted the show because I said the War on Christmas was a myth. So tell me about that.
Well, we've protested the concept of the War on Christmas a number of times. I mean, I know a lot of atheists who celebrate various holidays and they don't care about the religious significance of it. It's like who goes out who does anything on Halloween because they're honoring the ghosts of the dead or All Saints Eve or any of the original traditions. It's an opportunity for a woman to dress like a slutty nurse when she can't normally get away with doing that. This is the kind of thing. At what other point can you and your son build a Dalek, out of a shopping cart so that you can go door to door trick or treating like that? Because that's what my boy and I did.
Awesome. I'm a big Whovian too. I've been watching Doctor Who since the '80s. Whenever I was a little kid.
Yeah, I did a video on this. It was one of my earliest videos where actually my son and I actually did build a Dalek on wheels that he could go trick or treating in, and that was a fun thing to do.
That's awesome. One of my son's first onesies was a 10th Doctor little suit, like a little onesie that looked like the 10th Doctor.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, and it's true. And with Christmas, it's actually like, I mean, Halloween. There's actually some relation to some of the Christmas holidays, but mainly it's just got those other kinds of origins, and we set those origins aside and kind of celebrate it how we want. The thing with Christmas is that most of the traditions that we like are secular and date back to secular sources. It's not a religious holiday. It never has been. It didn't originate as one. The church tried to Christianize it in the 300s, but it never really worked. It remained a secular. It was celebrated in a secular way all the way throughout the Middle Ages. So much so that the Puritans tried to stamp it out. They tried to ban Christmas. And when they lost power and Christmas started to make a comeback, It was secular forces that made a comeback, and it made a secular comeback. The kind of traditions that came back around were secular traditions. And once it was clear that Christmas was here to stay again, the Christians tried to Christianize it again with Jesus is the reason for the season and keep Christ in Christmas and all that. But it's never
Because
been
they couldn't
primarily.
admit that Santa Claus owns that holiday.
Yeah, Santa Claus has only owned it for about 200 years. Before that, it was not about even giving gifts to kids. That's only about 200 years old. So this is myth number 3, that a lot of our traditions are old-fashioned.
Tell me more about that. We've
Yeah,
only got
so
a few minutes left. So I want to make sure that we hear this part.
yeah, so I mean, basically, the idea is that most of the traditions that we take part in, giving gifts to kids, Christmas trees, stockings, most giving gifts is one of the big ones, are only about 200 years old. There was some gift giving that went on in Saturnalia, but it wasn't big gift giving, and certainly it wasn't giving gift to kids. The giving gifts to kids thing was basically invented by the poem, the Clement Clark Moore poem. And then the gift giving got exaggerated through consumerism. Basically, businesses realized that they could convince us to spend more by exaggerating our gift giving obligations. So first it was to the kids, then it was also to your wife, then it was also the wife to the husband, then it was to everybody you know, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Christmas trees are only about 500 years old, and that was only their origin. They actually were just a local phenomena in a couple places in Germany until about the 1820s. And then in the 1820s, the Christmas tree becomes popular both in Germany and in America at the same time. So really, the Christmas tree has only been popular for about 200 years.
Well, what about Jeremiah 10? You know, the prohibition about putting up what I always understood or interpreted to be a Christmas tree inside people's houses.
I have this. I have that in the book as well. Read that verse very carefully. It is not actually about decorating a tree with silver and gold. They take the tree and make it into an idol. So like they actually carve an idol out of it, and then they put the gold and the silver on the idol. It is not a decorated tree. That tradition is not a decorated tree. David Fitzgerald has a nice passage about that, I think, in his new book. He's the one that actually turned me on to this, because I thought like you did. I thought, it sounds like they're kind of decorating a Christmas tree there. And if you read that verse closely, it's not about decorating a tree at all. It's about taking a tree and making an idol. The actual Christmas tree tradition comes out of a couple places in Germany in the 1510s, I think. About 1510 is about the oldest one that we have a record of. But again, it doesn't become popular until the 1820s. So yeah, so like, I mean, gift giving, giving gifts to kids, even Christmas being a domesticated gift giving to kids holiday is only about 200 years old. Before that, it was more like St. Patrick's Day. It was feasting, drinking, and lots of sex. That's how you celebrated Christmas before the 1800s, basically. And
that's why they call it Xmas.
Triple Xmas, right? In Skeefer's book, is it in Skeefer's book? I think it is. She mentions, and I mentioned this in the book as well, she mentions some places where midnight masses in places, I think even in Ireland, were bookended by orgies. They would have sex, they would do the midnight mass, and then they would just continue on with their orgy. They would do them outside, lit by bonfires. It was a very highly sexual time. This traced all the way back to the Saturnalia traditions that were very sexual because they were getting very drunk during Saturnalia. And this continued all the way on through until Christmas was kind of domesticated in the 1820s, 1830s. Yeah, I mean, there's much more of in much more detail in that.
It is a midwinter celebration, so those, you know, the alcohol and sex are probably the two best ways to beat that.
Yes, yes, and for the ancients, I mean, it was the time that they had. It was the only time they had this time where they had no work and abundance of food, abundance of drink, abundance of time on their hands. So it was this perfect opportunity to party, and that's what they did.
Okay. We're nearing the end of this, and I want to say that I really appreciate or really enjoyed the way you present your arguments in this. This has been a fun thing. Do you know David Fitzgerald, by the way?
I do. I gave him a copy of the book when I met the same conference I met Mark at. I gave him a copy of the book there, and he read it and gave me some feedback and that kind of stuff on it. Yeah.
Well, very sweet. It sounds like good material, and obviously I'm going to have to read it because there's a lot of stuff in there that, as I said, I thought I knew and clearly did not. Was there another aspect, another one of your 7 points that we missed? Given to me again?
We didn't talk about the war on Christmas that much.
We did, yeah, and I was protesting. My wife and I made a video where we were talking about how we still celebrate Christmas. We don't really now, but we did a couple of years back, and I just kind of gave up on it. But it had been a thing that here locally, here in Dallas, we have a pastor called Robert Jeffress who runs this massive megachurch. It's one of 90 megachurches in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and this is one that cost $80 million. And he raised money from his parishioners to build this, like super glass-walled megachurch with a giant fountain and all of this on it. But one of the things that he does to the local businesses is he thought it would be a fun idea to boycott businesses and call them out on what he called a naughty list. Mm-hmm. So that if they used the word Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, then he would urge his megachurch, this huge following, and of course, by connection, all of these other Christian churches that are looking at his online naughty list, that these are the stores that cater to the pagans or the heathens or the atheists, and we want good Christian stores. So if they say Merry Christmas, then we'll give them our business, and if they say Happy Holidays, they'll be boycotted. And he thought that was a fun thing to do.
Yeah, and that's horrific. I mean, it's so hateful in that way, right? I mean, I personally don't think that anyone should have a problem with the phrase Merry Christmas, because I don't think it's a Christian phrase, even though it's got the word Christ in it. When people, the images it invokes are not Christian, they're not religious. When we think of Christmas, we think of Santa Claus, we think of presents, we think of trees. In the same way that the word Sunday does not invoke sun worship, even though that's where the name originates, is originally from sun worship. And so, but in the same vein, someone who says Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas is more likely just trying to be more inclusive. I wouldn't.
And therein lies the problem. The whole war on Christmas thing is about being exclusive, right? Mm-hmm. Pushing everybody out as an outlier and clinging to our own little Christian coven, and that's what's so insidious about it. It's so bigoted. It's a basic prejudice. It's Trump-esque.
It is very Trump-esque. It really is. Kind of demonizing others who don't celebrate it your way. And that's kind of one of the things I argue in the book, is that Christmas doesn't really belong to anyone. It doesn't belong to Christians or non-Christians. Anyone should be free to celebrate it, and anyone should be able to free to celebrate it however they want. Because it's
one classic example. I mean, somebody used a marijuana plant as a Christmas tree, and just all they did was put a Santa hat on it.
That's fine. There's nothing. I mean, there's nothing inappropriate about it. It's not. That's not traditional. But again, the Christmas tree tradition is only about 200 years. Start a new tradition. Abandon old traditions. One of the things I open the book with is that kind of an example about how traditions can be harmful and they should be abandoned when they're harmful. Something we used to do was put candles in trees. Instead of, before we had electric lights, we would put candles in trees, in Christmas trees, and they would burn down. Now in Germany, the houses were built of stone, that wasn't a problem, but when people started doing this in the States, where the houses were made of wood, hundreds of Christmas tree fires burned down entire houses and killed whole families.
One of the stories that I heard about the origin of the Christmas tree was that it was originally a Druidic ceremony, and that the Druids used the tree as a symbol of life, and that they would set it on fire or kill it as a life sacrifice. And that when Christian groups came in and tried to Christianize these areas, now remember, this is just a story, so that I heard people say, so I have no idea its credence. And the Christians came in and said, well, let's just put candles in there to kind of symbolize, the sacrifice. So I don't know. It sounds to me now like a rationalization.
Mm-hmm. So kind of a just so story to explain why the tradition. Yeah, and I'm not even sure if we know why. We kind of the first Christmas tree we have some kind of record of is around 1510 in one of those Germanic villages, and I have the name of it in the book. It's slipping my mind right now. And the candles likely were from some of the old traditions of basically, since it's the darkest time of year, we're trying to fight the darkness by lighting candles and that kind of stuff. And so you would put the candles in the tree, to light it up in that kind of way. They would just kind of transfer over from that old tradition.
Which, if looking at what a fire hazard a regular Christmas tree is with electric lights, how the hell do they pull off candles in a powder keg of a tree?
I know, and well, I mean, to their credit, they would usually this old tradition was only on Christmas Eve. They would cut off the top of a fir tree, put it on a table, and they would only do it for just a little while on Christmas Eve. So they'd put it in the parlor where the children couldn't go. They'd put the presents in the tree, put the candles on the tree. They'd just open up the door and let the kids come in. they'd kind of have fun around it or whatever, and then they'd blow out the candles. But still, it would catch on fire. The thing is, we didn't get away with it. A number of trees burned down and burned down houses. The point of the example is that, and yet we kept doing it, even though it was this huge hazard. But it's tradition, so I guess we have to light the candles in the Christmas tree, even though we're risking our lives by doing so. If a tradition is harmful, stop it. Stop doing it. We're so locked into tradition, we can't help it.
But tradition.
Right, yeah. Singing it in a song doesn't make it any more convincing to me. But that's the problem with traditions, is they can lock onto us in that way, and we can't give them up even when they're obviously harmful. And that's what I argue. Like, that's in my chapter on Christmas spending. I argue that we're kind of locked into Christmas spending, and it's actually not good for the economy. It actually hurts the economy in a number of different ways that we'd be better off without it, and yet we just keep on doing it.
Can you summarize in the last couple of minutes what that's about?
Yeah, so there's three ways that it's not good for the economy. One of the arguments is that basically, at best, it's neutral, that all Christmas does is concentrate spending at the end of the year. If we didn't spend that money at Christmas, it's not like it would just evaporate from the economy. We just wouldn't spend it in December. We'd spend it at other times, at other places, for other reasons. I also argue that if we instead saved it, instead of spending it on retail goods, that actually wouldn't be a bad thing. I don't think the John Maynard Keynes paradox of thrift is really a paradox. But another argument that I use is an economist. Is a fun little book called Scroogenomics by Jared Wadfogel. It's either Joel Wadfogel or Jared Wadfogel. The name's escaping, but Wadfogel's the last name. And it's called Scroogenomics. It's a little thing that you could fit in a stocking. That's kind of what it's designed as. And he argues that in a lot of ways, present gift giving, Christmas present gift giving, creates what he calls dead weight loss, which what that means is we are spending more money on gifts than what they are worth to their recipients. Because basically, we often don't know what people want, but we feel obligated to get them something anyway. And so we'll spend $100 on something and give it to someone when they at best would have only spent $10 on that same item. And so you basically created $90 of what he calls dead weight loss. And that's the same kind of dead weight loss that's produced by government pork barrel spending when we spend more money on a project than it's worth, right? Like we build a bridge to nowhere or something like that. And yet there is more dead weight loss created at Christmas than all government pork barrel spending each year combined.
Okay. All right, in our last couple of minutes, do you have anything else that you want to say in summary?
Yeah, well, Mark's telling me to remind everybody where you can get the book. So the book is called The Myth That Stole Christmas. Last time I looked, they still had copies on Amazon. They had sold out at one point, but I believe they got more. So you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on BarnesandNoble.com. You can find it at the Humanist Press website. If it's not on Amazon, you can get it from third-party sellers on Amazon as well. And you can get it in ebook or you can get the print format. If you get quick enough shipping, you should be able to get it in time for the holidays to make a very ironic Christmas gift. Because what's more ironic than a gift that suggests that maybe we shouldn't give so many damn gifts?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean that's it. And really, it's the reviews I've got have been very positive in that I try to be very respectful of people's own traditions and ability to kind of celebrate the holiday how you want. So I'm very specific about if you want to celebrate Christmas as a religious holiday, that's your bag, go for it. There's no objection to that. But what you shouldn't do is think that that is the only or best way to celebrate the holiday. That really, it's really a holiday that belongs to us all. It always has been, always will be. You should feel free to celebrate it or not celebrate it if and how you want. That's the kind of big overall, I don't know if it's a self-help message or something like that. I'm a philosopher, so I don't really do self-help in that way. But that's the kind of idea that I'm trying to get across. And the reviews have said that I'm very respectful. It's not a hateful book. I don't hate Christmas. I actually love Christmas and enjoy celebrating it. And that's the kind of gist of the book.
Okay, and I think my first promotion of this was something along the lines of, all right, all you Grinches and Scrooges. who's up for a war on Christmas, and then we're going to be interviewing you. That's what I build it all together like that.
Well, actually, in the end of chapter 4, I actually respond to that. You're a Scrooge, you're a Grinch objection, and I actually argue that my attitudes, the attitudes I take toward Christmas, are actually Scroogey and Grinchy, but they're like the Reform Scrooge and the Reform Grinch at the end of those stories, not the ones at the beginning.
Okay, and one last comment on the war on Christmas. You got to remember how exclusive are we? Starbucks has a red cup that doesn't say anything on it, and everybody gets pissed off.
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's if there is a war, you can't win it because 96% of people celebrate Christmas anyway, and no matter what happens, it'll always be just construed as a war. No matter what it is, people will just turn it into one, right?
Well, the war on Christmas is just one battle in the culture war, of Christianity, which is another imagined confrontation. All right, I'm going to close it up now. And do you have anything you wanted to add, Mark? Nope, he shakes his head. Okay.
Mark, I should add, Mark did correct me a little bit on Zagmuk. I'm pretty sure I get it right in the book, but one of the ancient traditions that we were talking about. But it fell at a slightly different time of the year than I was indicating, but it still does serve as a precursor to Christmas. But
very good. All right, well, it's been a pleasant interview, and I'm going to close it up. Thank you, everybody. Good night, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Aaron. See you, Mark.